Blog Talk Radio.
Welcome to our program on Kardec Radio.
Welcome to the messengers in our home. Hello, dear Kardec Radio listeners, and welcome back to another chapter of the messengers in our home. Tonight we're going to talk about chapter 12, Monteiro's account. Hello, Mackenzie.
Hi, Francisca. And hello, dear friends. Welcome back to another chapter of the messengers in our home.
So let us prepare for our meeting by elevating our thoughts and connecting to God, our Creator. Dear Mother, Father God, we praise you for your love and justice, for your creation, and all your support we receive in our lives. And we thank you for this wonderful opportunity of being gathered in your name virtually to study more about how to practice what we preach about the spiritual laws and how important it is to remember that we are spiritual beings temporarily in a physical experience here on earth. I would like to welcome the mentors of Kardec Radio and thank them for their constant support. To all those who are co-creating these programs, and also all of you, dear listeners. May you feel their presence and their love while sharing this learning experience with us. So be it. Let us now listen to the reading of chapter 12. Enjoy.
Chapter 12, Monteiro's account. The teachings here vary. Bellarmino's friend took over the conversation. Displaying a pleasant speaking voice, he continued. I've been coming to the Messenger Center every day for 3 years now, and there are always new things to learn. I get the impression that the blessings of Spiritism arrived too early on the human path. If my trust in the Father were less firm, I would actually believe such a conclusion. Bellarmino, who was watching his friend's mannerisms closely, broke in. Monteiro has a great deal of experience in this matter. Yes, Monteiro confirmed. I certainly have had my share of experience. I too have wandered aimlessly around in various terrestrial settings. As you know, it is very hard to escape the influence of one's environment when struggling in the flesh. The demands of the senses are so many and so great regarding the outside world that I too was unable to escape cruel misfortune. How so? I asked. It's that the multiplicity of the phenomena and the peculiarities of mediumship entail invaluable surprises for any instructor who has more reasoning in his head than feeling in his heart. At any time, mental corruption can sidetrack any worker who is more enthusiastic than sincere, and that's what happened to me. After a slight pause, he continued. I don't have to explain that I too left No Solar at another time on a mission of spiritual understanding. I wasn't going to induce spirit phenomena, but was going to help with the spiritual enlightenment of incarnates and discarnates. It was an immense job. Bellarmino here can testify to that fact because we left at almost the same time. I received all the help I needed to begin my grand task, and inexpressible joy prevailed in my spirit as I went about my first duties. My mother was my devoted guide, and she couldn't contain her joy. Enormous enthusiasm had taken hold of my spirit. I had a number of physical effects mediums under my direct control, as well as some others devoted to psychography and psychophony. The fascination that dealing with the invisible world had on me was so great that I became completely distracted from the moral essence of the Spiritist doctrine. We held 4 meetings per week, and I never missed one of them. I must confess that I felt a certain pleasure in instructing lower order discarnates. I had lengthy, rehearsed exhortations on the tip of my tongue, ready for all of them. I enabled the suffering ones to see that their situation was due to their own fault. I emphatically advised the deceitful ones to abstain from their vicious lies. Cases of obsession earned my impassioned dedication. I loved to confront cruel obsessors, reducing them to nothing with my weighty argumentation. Another characteristic that highlighted my strength was the control I claimed to have over a few poor, discarnate Roman Catholic priests who were ignorant of the divine truths. I went to the extreme of patiently studying long passages of Scripture, not to meditate on them with understanding, but to chew on them to my heart's content. Then, in the middle of a session, and with the sinful notion of false spiritual superiority, I would spew them out at troubled spirits. My attachment to outward manifestations had completely disoriented me. I lit the torch for others, but I preferred the paths of darkness and forgot about myself. Only when I returned here I was able to see the extent of my blindness. For instance, at times, after a long talk on patience, in which I imposed a heavy obligation on discarnates with respect to that particular virtue, I would open the windows of our classroom and snap at the children who were playing innocently in the street. I preached to troubled discarnates to keep calm, but a few seconds later I would scold humble women at the meeting when they were unable to contain their sobs over some sick little child. I acted like that regarding the least little thing. My attitudes were just as inflexible at my place of business. Hardly a month went by that I didn't file a suit over a promissory note. I remember some of the unfortunate retailers who begged me for time, pardon, or protection. Nothing would dissuade me, however. Their lawyers knew there was no way I would change my mind. I spent my days in the office figuring out the best, but not always the most ethical, way to hound late-paying clients. Then at night I would go to teach love, patience, and sweetness to my fellow beings, exalting suffering and struggle as blessed highways of preparation for God. I was blind. I couldn't see that earthly existence in and of itself is an ongoing Spiritist session. I shaped Spiritism in my own way. Every protection and guarantee for myself, invaluable advice for my neighbor. Furthermore, I couldn't draw my thoughts away from the phenomena. Apart from the practical sessions, my instructional activity consisted of endless commentaries about these phenomena, wordy duels, stories about uncommon occurrences and harsh criticism of mediums. Monteiro paused a bit, smiled, and continued. I went from error to error, distracted from what was truly essential, when a heart attack caught me completely off guard. I came here like a lunatic needing an asylum. I realized too late that I had abused the sublime faculties of speech. How can one teach without setting an example, or guide without showing love? Dangerous and rebellious spirits were waiting for me when I left the physical plane. I experienced an unusual phenomenon. My reason was asking for divine help, but my sentiments were clinging to inferior purposes. My mind was turning to heaven in supplication, but my heart was holding on to the earth. In this sad state, I found myself surrounded by malevolent beings who repeated long passages to me from our former spiritist sessions. They sarcastically recommended calmness, patience, and forgiveness of others' faults. They also asked me why I didn't let go of the world since I had discarnated. I yelled, pleaded, and screamed, but I had to bear such torment for a long time. When my sentiments of attachment to the physical sphere lessened, the commiseration of some good friends brought me here. And just imagine, my brother, my unhappy spirit was still rebellious. I still felt discontent. After all, hadn't I encouraged sessions of exchange between the two planes? Hadn't I devoted myself to instructing discarnates? Realizing how foolishly upset I was, kindly friends committed me to treatment. I still wasn't satisfied. I asked Minister Veneranda for a hearing, since she had been the intercessor for my opportunity as an incarnate. I wanted explanations that could satisfy my personal whims. The minister is always very busy, but always attentive. She refused to schedule a hearing because of the senselessness of my request. However, out of great courtesy, she visited me during a break she had set aside for rest. I riddled her ears with complaints. I wept bitterly, and my benefactress, a marvel of angelical patience, listened to me for 2 long hours. In expressive silence, she let me tire of my long and useless exhibition. When I finally shut up, expecting her to say something that would feed the monster of my incomprehension, Veneranda smiled and replied, Monteiro, my friend, the cause of your defeat is neither complex nor difficult to explain. You surrendered yourself excessively to practical spiritism with humans, our brothers and sisters, but you were never interested in practicing true spiritism with Jesus, our Master. Monteiro paused, thought for a few moments, and then said, My attitude has changed a lot since then, understand? Stunned by this profound lesson, I answered, chewing on my words like one who thinks more in order to say less. Yes, yes, I think I'm beginning to. Translator's notes. Physical effects mediums are particularly able to induce physical phenomena such as movements of inert objects, noises, etc. This is in the Medium's book by Allan Kardec, translation of the International Spiritist Council, 2011, 3rd edition. Psychography, the writing by spirits using the medium's hand, also in the Medium's book. Psychophony, communication by spirits through the voice of a speaking medium, also in the Medium's book. So, tonight, we're going to talk about Chapter 12, Monteiro's account. And as a beginning, I would like to read the last sentence of the previous chapter, Chapter 11, when we talked about Bellarmino, and Andre finishes this chapter, Chapter 11, by saying this: "Yes, Bellarmino," I said, embracing him, "you're right, and I can see that I have come not only to a messenger center, but to a center of great learning." And learning is what we're going to do, and hopefully it's what we are doing when we are gathering here, while we are gathering here to study and to learn about these teachings that we received and we keep receiving from the spiritual realm through some great mediums, that messages that come from good spirits who are willing to come to us to show their stories, to share their stories also, and so that we can relate to their stories and think about our own lives. Because the stories that we are reading, the stories that we are listening to, that we are being presented to, they are not just mere fictional stories. These are actual stories. These are real stories, stories of people just like us, who lived here on earth and had their deeds to perform, had their lives to live, and failed to some degrees, were able to accomplish some other tasks, just like us, just like what we are doing with our own lives. So it is very important for us that while we are in this messenger center here with Andre, that we take our time to relate these stories that we are hearing, that we are discussing here, to our personal stories, to check how we are doing with our own lives. Naturally, it is for each one of us to think about that, and we are not passing judgment or saying specific things for people, for me, for you, for anyone to do, but for us to reflect upon the message and see, how am I doing? These are our choices, right? We need to choose how we are living, how we are going to live from the moment that we were born. Well, naturally, we were very young and we couldn't choose that much, and only after a certain time, certain point in our lives, we could have started to choose our path. And that's where we are now, right? We can choose what we do with our lives, which path we are following. And this is why we are listening to these stories here of these different spirits. We had Bellarmino, we have Vicente, we have now in chapter 12 Monteiro, and we had a few others in the past. And highly recommend, if you're just starting to listen to us now, to go back and read the other chapters, or follow and listen to the first or the initial chapters up to this point, so that we can be on pace with each other, knowing what we have learned so far. But then going back to the last sentence of Andre, of chapter 11, when Andre writes to us, he says that this is not just a messenger center, but a center of great learning. And that's how, with this learning word that he finishes the chapter, where we pick up in this chapter that we are starting now, chapter 12. Because remember, when we were talking about chapter 11, we said that Bellarmino had a friend by his side. Bellarmino was telling his story, and Bellarmino's friend is Monteiro, right? And then they are all together. They are all listening to what Bellarmino is saying. Monteiro doesn't say anything. But now in chapter 12, he is the first to speak. So he says, the teachings here vary. And this is very interesting, right? Because we can see if this writing was not divided in chapters, if we were there listening to this conversation, it's a non-stop conversation, right? They're interacting with each other, just like we do when we are meeting new friends, when we are meeting new people. And that's what, once again, I keep repeating this, but we need to always have this in focus, because differently than what happened in No Solar, which was the previous book that we studied, these first chapters, they are all happening in a very short period of time. They just left the lecture by Telesforo, and they are all together at the hall, meeting and talking to different spirits who are sharing their stories. And here's Monteiro and Bellarmino, they are friends, and so they're talking about their personal stories. And Vicente took Andre to them because Andre wanted to know a little bit more, not from the mediums themselves, but from those people who were responsible to instruct the mediums and also to instruct the spirits who were discarnated and were present at the spiritist sessions or the mediumistic spiritist sessions. And so therefore they meet Bellarmino Ferreira, and Monteiro. And Monteiro is listening to the story, and naturally he knows that the teachings there vary a lot, because for every single spirit, we are individualities. We all have our stories, and we all can have teachings to tell other people, not only by what we say, not only by what we can tell, but naturally by what we live. So Monteiro has naturally a different story than what Bellarmino has, and we are here to listen to what Monteiro has to tell us about his story. And he starts by saying that he's been coming to the Messenger Center every day for 3 years now, and there are always new things to learn. And I don't think that how much we need to stress this point, because it is what life is about, right? Is one of the main points of life is for us to learn. And naturally, he has been learning more and more as time passes how to do what he needs to do to accomplish his tasks, since and we already know this, he failed what he proposed to do once he was incarnated. And remember, he's not going to tell this specifically in this chapter, but since he tells us that he was in No Solar and he was prepared to go back to the incarnate life, because we already learned this from Bellarmino and from the other accounts, we know that he was prepared to do this. Right? So he's coming there every day for 3 years now. So he's been learning. He's been working together with other spirits, studying, and always learning new things. The question to ourselves here is, what are we learning while we are living? And we're going to go back to this point, because when we say, and when he says that he is going there every day for 3 years, he is telling us that we learn. It doesn't matter where. It doesn't matter where we are. It doesn't matter who we are. We can always learn, because there are always new things to learn. However, he makes a point here that I think it is really interesting. And he says that if his trust in the Father were less firm, meaning if he didn't trust God as much as he trusts God, he would believe that Spiritism arrived too early on the human path. Why does he say that? Right? Spiritism unveils so much to us that sometimes it can be overwhelming, because it opens up a whole new world of information, or if not of information in and of itself, but it opens up a way of thinking and seeing things in a completely different way. Right? We should have seen that before, because it's not that it is Spiritism in and of itself, as I said before, because Jesus himself was telling us all the time that his kingdom was not of this world. So if his kingdom is not of this material world, we need to look at what Jesus is trying to teach us, not from the material perspective only. We sure can take a look at that from the material perspective, from the flesh, right? From the bodily perspective. However, we really need to make an effort, a sincere effort, to look at this message from a spiritual point of view. Right? Learning that we are not the body that we have. We are spirits, and anything and everything that we do here reflects upon myself as a spirit. And since when I die, I don't die, and forgive me for repeating this time after time after time, it needs to change my way of seeing things and of doing things. And that's why Monteiro says what he just said. If he didn't trust God as much as he does, he would think that the blessings of Spiritism arrived too early, as if we are not prepared to receive these openings, to receive this unveil of this world after we die. And this is for our pure reflection, right? And since we trust God and we know that these things come when the time has arrived to come, unless we delay it because we didn't do what needed to be done, then things come when they need to come. So Spiritism is here, and we are all learning with the teachings that Spiritism brings to us or reminds us of, right? So Bellarmino, who is naturally close by, says that Monteiro has a great deal of experience in this matter because he was supposed to come and teach the world, teach the spirits, and teach us who were there together with him, us meaning the incarnate ones, right? But also as we all are living on earth, because it is very different to hear people who were not incarnated talking about the incarnation, and hear people who were incarnated, who had their share of problems while they were here, in saying, oh, I had this and this problem, and that's what caught me, that's what I couldn't solve when I was incarnated. So it is a different kind of lesson when and once we can hear a person that went through, I wouldn't say the same exact situation that we are living, but to some situations who we can or that we can relate to in our personal lives. So that's what he says, right? Yes, he certainly had a share of experience, and he had wandered aimlessly around in various terrestrial settings. And here comes something that's interesting, and maybe if you're following us, you know that every time I hear a name here in the story, I want to tell you what's the story of that name. And it's been a few minutes already, and I didn't mention what Monteiro means. But here is the point in the story where we can relate to what the name Monteiro means. Monteiro is a surname, is a family name of probably Spanish or Portuguese origin, and the family Monteiro was a family of knights or of head horsemen who were responsible for the royal huntings, for organizing the royal huntings. So he had to wander around, right? He had to to walk to walk around the terrains to see what was going on, and maybe to prepare what the king would go after. And maybe that's what Monteiro was doing here, right? He was like a head horseman going ahead and plowing the fields, or preparing the field, so that every single person who came after him would know what the field had to offer to them. So it's like he was opening up the terrain of the teachings of Jesus for everybody to take profit from it. So that's what I take from the name Monteiro. And he says again, I too have wandered aimlessly around in various terrestrial settings. So he says that he wandered aimlessly. So this is his judgment on what he actually did while incarnated. So we already know that he was a knight, or this horseman, the head horseman, and he wasn't able to actually prepare the terrain for what the king, quote unquote here, needed to do, or needed him to do. And he explains himself, saying that it is very hard to escape the influence of one's environment when struggling in the flesh. And we all know that, right? We are here just hearing or reading a confirmation of how hard it is. And he goes further and says that the demands of the senses are so many and so great regarding the outside world that I too was unable to escape cruel misfortune. So what he's saying is, well, maybe I knew what I needed to do. I am a Monteiro, right? I had to go and prepare it. However, once I got to the field, I couldn't escape the influence. Maybe I was, I don't know, maybe I wanted to receive recognition. Maybe I wanted to show that I know more than the others, and then I didn't prepare them to receive what they needed to receive. So it's for us to put ourselves in Monteiro's flesh here and think of, is my struggle? What is the environment pulling us toward to? What is the, quote unquote here, temptation that I'm feeling in the world, right? Because that's what he says, right? The demands of the senses, of the material senses are so many and so great regarding the outside world. We're so focused, and we are being called at all times towards the material world. And sometimes we don't stop, or most of the times, hopefully only a few times, but most of the times we're being called. And since we still have that difficulty inside of ourselves, we are tempted. We are being called, and we are saying, oh, I have to fight against it because I still have that difficulty inside of myself. I like to think of this as if a person, for example, used to smoke, right? And is trying very hard to stop and has stopped for a while, and then comes another person and offers him or her a cigarette. How hard is it going to be for him or her to say no to that? Because we are struggling with that feeling. We are struggling with the demands of that sense. But if a person never smoked and doesn't have on him or on her that necessity or that demand inside of her, if I offer him or her the cigarette or a drink or something that is not tempting to that person, it will not be a temptation. So the temptation is not on the exterior, it's actually on the inside. So we need to figure out what is this demand of the senses regarding the outside world that pulls me out. It's not the same for all of us. So we need to figure this out. And in Monteiro's case, he doesn't mention anything about drinking or about drug addiction. He doesn't mention anything on the exterior on this way, but since we already know his story, his addiction was probably of being too proud of himself, of knowing too much, of really thinking that he was superior to others. And that's what Andre still doesn't understand. And he says, so how so that you have this misfortune, quote unquote, here? And Monteiro comes to tell Andre that it's that the multiplicity of the phenomena and the peculiarities of mediumship entail invaluable surprises for any instructor who has more reasoning in his head than feeling in his heart. So here we see the problem. Here we see Monteiro's problem. And maybe it's a problem of a few of us, of a lot of us, maybe of none of us, but it's one problem. It's the temptation of the reasoning. It's the temptation of, okay, let me reason this out, but let's not feel what the message is about, right? So there's so much in mediumship phenomena. There's so many types of mediumships. There's so many messages, so many spirits trying to communicate, and so many details in mediumship that the instructors can be caught up in the reasoning side of it, instead of paying attention that for us to have a medium receiving a message from a spirit, there are two sides. There's the medium side and there's the spirit side. And if it's a spirit and if it's a medium, we're talking about living beings. We're talking about intelligent beings. We're not talking about machines. We're talking about people who have specific problems and that we need to, while trying to help them, to feel the problem and not only to reason the problem and remove the feeling of the problem and just pound like a hammer to the head of the person who already made a mistake. And that's what he will tell us, that at any time mental corruption, and here he is relating to this reasoning, right? Mental corruption can sidetrack any worker who is more enthusiastic than sincere. Oh, we have all the enthusiasm. Oh, let's nail this down here. So let's do this. We can do this. But it's with enthusiasm, not with the sincerity of the heart, right? So he is making this separation here. We need to have reasoning, but we also need to have the feeling. We also need to understand the message. We also need to really know and have the sincere understanding of the message inside ourselves. And that's what he's going to explain to us, right? His mission, after he left No Solar, was of spiritual understanding, not as a medium, but he was going to help with the spiritual enlightenment of incarnates and discarnates. Right? So he had the, quote unquote here, power of words. He would have the ability of speaking. And maybe now I should stop and listen to what I am saying right now, because if I am speaking right now, maybe I have the same task or a similar task to what Monteiro had, and I need to listen to this very carefully. We all have specific tasks. Mine maybe is to talk, but what am I doing with what I am saying? That's my responsibility, right? So you might have a different task. Maybe your task is to listen, and if you need to listen, you need to be prepared to listen. Maybe your task is to lend hands, but you need to be present to lend hands. So we all have our personal tasks. In the case of Monteiro here, it was an immense job, Bellarmino was there, and he says that Bellarmino can testify because they were there at almost the same time. But his task was of spiritual enlightenment. See, it's to enlighten of the spiritual life and to feel what that means. He briefly describes that he started his job, started his first duties, that his mother was there for him. She wasn't. She was always happy for him to do this, and he was very enthusiastic about the work. He had a lot of physical effect mediums who are the mediums who can materialize a spirit who is discarnated. So for everybody who doesn't have mediumship, to see the other spirits, can sometimes move objects around. This is not very common anymore because it doesn't have a specific, how can I say, this mediumship was more common or was more used in the beginning for people to really see that this could happen, that we are dealing with discarnate spirits also, not only with the medium himself, but it usually and normally doesn't have a more direct or intellectual effect on people in the meetings. So that's why it's not very used anymore. And he had some of these physical effects mediums under his direct control, but also some other mediums devoted to psychography and psychophony. And these are more common. Why? Psychography is the ability of a medium to receive a written message from the spirit world. So comes a spirit, just like this book that we are reading now, and approaches the medium and influences the medium. The medium takes hold of a pen or a pencil, paper, and then they write what the spirit is writing, right? Or sometimes they're dictating. Sometimes the spirit is to some degree taking control of the medium and writing on the paper the message. The medium sometimes know what the spirit is writing. Sometimes the medium doesn't know specifically what the spirit is writing. These are different types of mediumship. This is not the book nor the time to explain in details these mediums in these different types of mediumship. If you want to know more about this, highly recommended The Medium's book by Allan Kardec. He goes into details of all these types of mediumship. Here, Andre, in this case here, Monteiro also talks about psychophony, which is when a discarnate spirit, uses the body of the medium to speak through him. And so what Monteiro was doing was he had these types of mediums under his direct control. That's what the words he used. So, and maybe that's one of the problems, and maybe that's one of that's his quote unquote here temptation, is the power that he had over these mediums, and he thought he had over these mediums, and he wanted over the spirits that came to talk. And he started to get fascinated with this, and that's where the problem starts. He became completely distracted from the moral essence of the Spiritist doctrine of Spiritism. So he got stuck on the surface, and he didn't go and follow through with the moral essence of Spiritism. He held, and they held at the Spiritist centers that he went to, 4 meetings per week, and he never missed one of them. So to see how enthusiastic and how focused he was on this work, on this job. And he says that he must confess that he felt a certain pleasure in instructing lower order discarnates. So he felt at ease with this, to talking and giving instructions to spirits of lower order, meaning spirits who were suffering or who had committed a lot of mistakes and were being brought to the meeting to be helped with comforting and consoling words. And he had lengthy, rehearsed exhortations on the tip of his tongue, ready for all of them. But how did he treat these spirits? Let's stop here and remember, we are talking about a mediumistic meeting, a mediumistic spiritist session. So we have the medium, we have a spirit who is discarnated and is giving a message or is being helped through the medium. Either he's writing through the medium or he's speaking through the medium. And the instructor, who in this case here is Monteiro, is giving instructions to the spirit who is together, not bonded, but is connected to the medium. So he is talking back or giving instructions to that spirit. The question here is, and you may be asking yourselves, okay, so what does this have to do with me? I don't go to a spiritist meeting or a mediumistic spiritist meeting. I don't go, and I don't want to go because it's not what I look for in spiritism. So why do I have to be careful about this? Once again, every teaching can be applied in two different cases. Remember, Monteiro said that his task was to help with the spiritual enlightenment of incarnates and discarnates. So maybe I am not going to be able, and I don't want to talk to discarnate spirits in spiritist sessions. However, I have friends. However, I have a father. I have a daughter. I have a coworker. I have an acquaintance. I have a person who I am talking to. And there will be a moment when probably somebody will ask my advice or my opinion on something. How do I speak? How do I talk to that person at that specific moment? And that's what Monteiro is trying to tell us here. He is pointing us to how do I use my words to talk, to instruct, to say something to another person. And see, he's going to give us a lot of examples, different examples of different cases, and we're going to note in a certain, how can I say, a certain connection between these cases to see not what the cases are about, but how he, Monteiro, was feeling inside of himself and how he was dealing with these situations. So he starts by saying that when a suffering spirit was coming to talk to him, he said that their situation was due to their own fault. He advised the deceitful ones to abstain from their vicious lies. See, we all know that, right? If a person is suffering, most of the times the suffering is due to their own causes. With the spiritist vision, even more, right? Because we all know that we don't suffer for nothing. So we can see a person who says, oh no, but it was not my fault. It was somebody who did this, and then as a consequence, I am here suffering. The question is, why you, right? And as a spiritist, we know that nothing is without a previous cause, so I have to be involved with that situation somehow in a previous life. But why will I point that out to a person instead of feeling the suffering of the other person and asking the person to get out of the mental state of the suffering and trying to look at the situation in a different way instead of just pointing that the situation was due to their own fault? Again, a person is a deceitful one and is lying to other people, and I'm going to come and just say, abstain from your vicious lies. Well, anyone can tell that to any other one, right? What is the task of a spiritist person? What is the task of a Christian? Is it to really keep pointing fingers? Is it our task? That's what Monteiro is saying, right? That's what he did. Cases of obsession earned his impassioned dedication. He loved to confront cruel obsessors, reducing them to nothing. Instead of loving the other, we're just putting them more and more down. But he goes on. He doesn't stop there. He says that, well, once when I was able to talk to Roman Catholic priests who were ignorant of the divine truths, because, as we keep saying, although we understand that Christ was always talking not about only this material life, but about the other lives, about how we go on once our body stays here, we were never actually taught that in a very clear way. So we are ignorant, right? We don't know some parts of these divine truths. And even Roman Catholic priests at that time, right? I'm not saying that, and remember, once we say this, when we talk about some or pastors, we are not saying this to condemn or to judge. Remember, we and I have lived before. Since I probably wasn't a spiritist before this life, I probably was a Roman Catholic. I could have been a Protestant. I could have been from a different religion. So if I judge or condemn, I'm condemning myself. So that's not the point. What he is saying here is, we sometimes are ignorant. And since he had that feeling, he wanted to show off himself, to really tell the other, who was, quote unquote, supposed to know more than I, now I can show you that I know more, and now you're suffering and I know more, and so on and so forth. So he went to the extreme, as he says, of patiently studying long passages of scriptures, not to meditate on them with understanding, but to chew on them to my heart's content. How much are we doing this? Not necessarily with passages of the Bible, but sometimes with passages of Spiritist books. How much are we learning? How much are we studying these books just for us to be able to show that we know, to say that we know, and to use these passages on other people that are suffering sometimes? Are we really listening, reading these books to meditate on them with understanding, with the purpose of actually getting those teachings and using these teachings in our own lives? So what he was doing was, in the middle of the session, with the sinful, and he uses this word here, sinful notion of false spiritual superiority, he would spew these teachings, this knowledge at these troubled spirits. His attachment to these manifestations, these outward manifestations, completely disoriented him. He used to lit torch for others, but he preferred the paths of darkness and forgot about himself. He was completely blind, and that's what he says. Right? He didn't notice this while he was incarnated, and that's the most dangerous thing. Because, as we already know his story, he never actually noticed that. He doesn't say that somebody came to him and told him something, but probably if he is an instructor, he needs to study, and naturally he needs to go to the Spiritist Center, and he is probably listening to other people give talks and participating on study groups. So he is listening to other people talking. So he should have known, but it never caught him and he never actually looked at what he was doing, how he was doing. So that's one of our big problems. Are we noticing that we are doing something that is against what I am studying, that is against what I am saying? Am I practicing what I'm preaching? That's the big question, right? And he says that only when he returned to the spiritual realm, he was able to see how blind he was. Hopefully these studies, the studies that we are following through here in Kardec Radio or in the Spiritist Center that you're going to, is opening our eyes, right? Hopefully we are able to notice our problems, because if we don't notice our problems, how are we going to be able to fix them? This is the very first step, right? For me to fix something, I need to see that the thing that I'm going to fix is broken. If I don't see it, if I don't understand that that thing is broken, that there's a problem with it, how am I going to even start to fix it? And that was Monteiro's problem. Is it our problem also? Only I can say it. Only you can say it, right? We are the ones who need to really stop and think, what am I doing with my life? What am I doing with the teachings that I'm receiving? Remember, the very first sentence of the chapter says, the teachings here vary. There's a lot of things for us to learn. But do we think, and to this regard of learning of the teachings that vary, Monteiro doesn't stop at the Spiritist Center. And remember, we talked about this briefly in the beginning of this conversation here. It's anywhere we are. We have a lot to learn. And now that he went through situations inside the Spiritist Center, now he's going to talk about situations outside of the Spiritist Center. For instance, at times, he says, after a long talk on patience, in which I imposed a heavy obligation on the scarnets with respect to that particular virtue, I would open the windows of our classroom and snap at the children who were playing innocently in the street. So he was talking about patience and then lost his own patience with the children who were outside of the Spiritist Center. The same thing happens again when he was asking the scarlet spirits to keep calm, but he would scold humble women at the meeting when they were having problems containing their sobs over some sick little child. So it happens to all of us. Do we notice it? That's the big question. Because this happens to all of us. This is the struggle of life, right? Of really understanding, knowing ourselves, perceiving how we are acting, sometimes out of instinct, because we don't think about it, because it already comes from myself. But for me to change this instinct that I built over thousands of years, tens of lives that we had before coming and being incarnated right now, I have to think so that I can stop and rebuild my feelings, these sentiments that I have inside of that I have inside of myself, that we have inside of ourselves. We have to stop and think, what can I do to change this? To think, what can I do to become more patient? Because if I don't see that I am losing a lot of patience And if I don't see that this is a problem, I am not going to be interested in solving something that I don't think is a problem. So we need to stop and look around and see, am I doing something that needs to be changed? And now Monteiro goes even further out of the Spiritist Center. He says that his attitudes were just as inflexible at his place of business. So his inflexibility on judging, on telling people what they needed to do, how they needed to behave, and how he behaved himself outside of the Spiritist Center. And see, that's why we were talking about before, in the beginning, on this learning process. We have so much to learn anywhere we go, in every place that I have interactions with other people. Here is in the office, at his place of business. So he was going after people who were not paying. So some of us may say, oh, but they bought something, right? And they need to pay it back. And this is correct, right? Even Jesus says, we need to comes a person, shows him and asks him, Caesar is charging a lot of taxes. What should we do? Should we say yes or should we say no? And Jesus notices that question was not a simple question. They wanted to catch him on going against Caesar, or to some degree against the people, right? And he says, well, give me one of your coins. So what is that you see here in this coin? What is this image? Oh, this is the image of Caesar. Yeah, so give Caesar what is Caesar's and give God what is God's. Right? So he's not saying that we shouldn't pay it back. No, that's not what he is saying. He's saying that if you deal with a person, if you owe the person something, we all need to pay it back. If you bought it, you need to pay it back, right? But we also need to give God what is God's. And the problem is that sometimes we focus, if not all the times, when we are talking about money, for example, if not, we never remember God in that conversation. We only remember the Caesar's part. We always and only remember that part. What is God in this situation, right? What is Jesus talking to us about? Give God's what is God's, right? Give to God back what belongs to him, right? What he's suggesting here to us is that in Monteiro's case, so that we have a practical case here, he says it himself. He remembers some of the unfortunate retailers who begged him for time, pardon, or protection. So the people who were probably not paying on time, they were coming back to Monteiro and asked them, why can I have some more time to pay? Can you pardon my debt? Or can you protect me from what is happening, and then I will do something else later? And he says, nothing would dissuade me. However, their lawyers knew there was no way I would change my mind. So he is telling us here that he didn't give God what is God's. He was only interested in giving Caesar what is Caesar's, because he was not looking at who is not paying or is didn't pay on the right time. He was not worried about the other person. And listen, I'm reading what he is telling us about his own story, right? So he was not worried about the person on the other side. He was worried about receiving the money and taking whatever cost it is. And he even goes further by saying that he spent his days in the office figuring out the best way to hound late-paying clients. And he adds, but not always the most ethical ways to hound late-paying clients. So he is confessing not to us, but to himself, that this was his motivation. We all know, and the one who bought it knows that he needs to pay. And I want to receive. And that's right, and there's no problem with this. However, we need to balance out things. We really need to understand that people go through different situations, go through hard times. And we really need to find a balance between these things, right? Or among these things, because maybe it's not only two things, maybe it's a lot of things going on. We really need to balance. We need to put love in our commerces, in our businesses. Love needs to be everywhere we go, in every little action that we take with our lives. And that's what he says. At night I would go to teach love, patience, and sweetness to my fellow beings, exalting suffering and struggle as blessed highways of preparation for God. Exalting suffering and struggle. And he was one giving more suffering and more struggle to other people. And as he is saying, I'm not putting words here in what he is saying, but he is saying that that's exactly what he was not doing in his place of business. What are we doing in our places of businesses? Be it wherever it is, right? It doesn't necessarily need to be in retail, and it can be in computers, and it can be in delivering, it can be in the medical field, it can be as a judge, it can be as a trash collector, it can be as anything. What is the type of love, patience, and sweetness that I'm putting in my place of business? So what he is saying here is that he used to preach that a lot to other spirits, but apparently he was not able to do it in his own life. He was blind, and that's what he says. I was blind. And this is one of the most important sentences of this chapter. Quote, I couldn't see that earthly existence in and of itself is an ongoing spiritist session. End quote. The spiritist session doesn't start at 7 p.m. of that day. It started once we were born and will end once we die. In his words, right? The earthly existence, because that's the moment, right, of our lives where we need to learn and practice so that we can show that we are progressing. That's where we know if we are better, right? Because as we keep seeing, once we don't have matter, once we don't have our bodies, our senses are much more clearer, and we can clearly see a lot of things. However, the world has these two main elements other than God, spirit and matter. So we need to learn to use both in our lives, because that's how the world is made. That's how the world was made. So once we are incarnated, that's what we need to deal with. And unfortunately for us spiritists, most of the times, or a lot of us at least, or hopefully, as I keep saying, not all of us or not many of us, only a few of us, only see a spiritist session or a spiritist meeting when we arrive at the spiritist center. And what Monteiro is teaching us here, telling us here, is that our existence is an ongoing spiritist session, meaning that we need to prepare ourselves at all times, because we are dealing with the spirits at all times. Since we are spirits, we are dealing with spirits at all times. And unfortunately for Monteiro, and hopefully not for us, but what he says after is also very sane. And we need to try to see if that's what we are doing with the teachings. Quote again. I shaped Spiritism in my own way. Every protection and guarantee for myself. Invaluable advice for my neighbor. End quote. To me, right, everything, right? I am here at the Spiritist Center. I know all this, so I am protected, right? I am guaranteed because I am here inside the Spiritist Center. I know all this. But all this is for the others to do, not for me. Is that what we are doing with the teachings of Spiritism? When I go to a Spiritist meeting, for example, when I see a good lecture, am I thinking, oh, my wife should be here, my husband should be here, oh, if my boss would only listen to this? No, if I am there, that teaching is not for the other who is not there. That teaching is for me. That's what Monteiro is telling us here. And furthermore, he goes on, I couldn't draw my thoughts away from the phenomena. I would think only about the phenomena, and I would just talk and talk, discuss with people, wordy duels, as he says, dueling with people because you think this, I think this, stories about, exterior phenomena, harsh criticism on mediums, what they're doing, how they're behaving. Is that any of our business? How much we pay attention to other people's lives and how much do we pay attention to our lives? That's where and why Monteiro was in such a problem. So he went from error to error, distracted from what was truly essential. And he died. Heart attack. So we clearly see that he didn't pay attention to any of this. He lived his life. He thought that everything was correct, that everything that he was doing was right, nothing to be to change, and then he died, right? So to the people who were incarnated, maybe they were, oh, this is a great man, all these things that he says, all these things that he tells us, all these teachings. Oh, Monteiro was a great spirit. He should be, once he dies, he will be in a very good shape, and so on and so forth. And then he dies, right? So people on earth were probably thinking, oh, what a great man, and then he's telling us that once he died, he woke up, right, as a lunatic needing an asylum. He realized too late that he had abused the sublime faculties of speech. How can one teach without setting an example or guide without showing love? And that's what happened to him, he's telling us. He didn't set an example. He didn't show love once he was doing what he was supposed to do, which was to give spiritual enlightenment and spiritual guidance to other people. So a lot of spirits were expecting, were waiting for him once he left the physical plane. And he says, my reason was asking for divine help, but his sentiments were clinging to inferior purposes. His mind was turning to heaven in supplication, but his heart was holding on to the earth. Once again, reasoning and feelings, sentiments, right? His mind knows that he needs to pray, but was he praying with heart? No love yet, right? And that's our difficulty, transforming what we reason, what we learn with our minds, into true essence of feeling within ourselves. This transition is very, very hard. And how do we transition from reasoning, pure reasoning, to having the feeling of that reasoning and having both? By practicing. There's no other way. If I want to learn patience, I need to start to have patience. If I want to ride a bike, how do I learn how to ride a bike? To ride bikes. Am I going to fall? Certainly, we are going to fall. I don't know anybody who ever learned how to ride a bike who never fell. I don't know any of us. Maybe you are out there. Maybe you never fell. But I seriously doubt that a person who is trying to ride a bike will not fall once in a while. Even after a long, long time of learning, there may be obstacles. There may be something that show up, and then, oh, I fell. But then once I realize I fell, I just stand up, shake the dust and say, hey, let's go again. I'm not going to stop just because I fell. Forgive, ask for forgiveness, and keep going. I'm going to try harder. I'm going to pay more attention to the road, and I'm going to try and make a big effort not to fall again. But if I don't ride, I will never learn how to ride. And that's how it is, and that's the beauty of learning, right? That's the beauty of practicing. My reason was asking for divine help, he says, but my sentiments were clinging to inferior purposes because he was not practicing what he was preaching. That's what he is saying here. So he found himself surrounded by a lot of unfortunate and malevolent spirits who were saying back to him what he was saying at the spiritist sessions. So, I'm talking about Jesus here and blah, 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 and saying this to that spirit. And then once he dies, some spirits would go back to him and say, oh, this is what you said, this is what you taught, and I'm going to listen. And what am I going to do? How, and will I be able to complain? Because what they're doing is the same thing as I did to them, right? It's not correct of them of doing it, but now, what can I do, right? I didn't protect myself. I didn't move on from this. I got stuck. There's a question that the spirits asked him. They asked him why he didn't let go of the world since he had discarnated. And maybe that's something that he asked them. Hey, why are you still coming to this mediumistic session? Don't you know that you already discarnated? And it was happening to him. The same thing was happening to him. And he had to bear such torment for a long time. There's a sentence that I like a lot. It's from a Spiritist book that has not yet been translated to English, but I'd like to read. I made a free translation. And I like it, and I correlate to this chapter a lot because even the title of the book is really, really saying about what we are talking here. The title of the book in Portuguese is Study and Live. It's like I said, it's not been translated yet, and there's this chapter 40. The message on chapter 40 is called Timely Aid or Timely Help. And it's a book psychographed by Chico Xavier also, but this message was written by the spirit Emmanuel, who is Chico Xavier's spirit guide. And he's talking about timely help. But he says at one point in this message number 40 again, he says, quote, "Remember them, the ones almost crazy due to suffering, and work so that Spiritism can bring them timely help. To accomplish this, let's study Allan Kardec under the brightness of Jesus Christ's message, and, be it through example or attitude, through our action or our words, remember that Spiritism asks a permanent kind of charity from us, the charity of its propagation. End quote. What I love about this quote, and when we are talking to people in Portuguese about Spiritism, we hear this part of this quote mentioned a lot, talking about that a great charity that we do to Spiritism, it's the charity of its propagation. But what I love about this quote, when we read this whole paragraph or this larger piece of the quote, is that what Emmanuel is telling us, is teaching us, is exactly what unfortunately happened to Monteiro, right? And I'm going to say it again, at least a small piece of this quote that I just read. Because if we want to propagate Spiritism, in what Emmanuel is saying here to us, he's saying that we need to propagate Spiritism, but he gives us 4 ways of propagating Spiritism. Through example, through attitude, through action, or through words. Isn't it exactly what didn't happen with Monteiro? He only used the last one, which is words. He didn't use his actions to disseminate or to propagate Spiritism. He didn't use his attitudes to propagate Spiritism. And he didn't use his example to propagate Spiritism. So we can propagate Spiritism with words. But the more effective and efficient way of doing it is doing all 4 of them. Example, attitude, action, and words. Let's practice what we preach. That's an ancient and old saying that is so current, that is so important for all of us. So, Monteiro was caught up in this very, very bad situation for himself. He was being tormented by these spirits. Time passed, these sentiments were being lessened, right? The attachment of the spirit from earth were being lessened, and then some friends came, rescued him, brought him back to No Solar, but he was still rebellious. He still felt very discontent. See, even after he died, even after he went back to the spiritual realm, it is as if he hadn't still understood what he had done when and while incarnated. He was still rebellious. He still believed that he was correct, that he did what he needed to do. I have to say, he was not incorrect, completely incorrect, right? He was teaching things, right? He was saying things, but maybe a lot of people got better because of something that he said. Maybe a lot of people got interested in Spiritism, in the teachings of Jesus, maybe, and maybe he was helped because he did that. However, for himself, for his life, he was not doing the best that he could do. And he didn't understand it, even after he died. That's what he asks. After all, hadn't I encouraged sessions of exchange between the 2 planes? Hadn't I devoted myself to instructing these carnates? So, at this moment, once he got back to No Solar, he was still unhappy, and he was still, but I did what I was supposed to do. I was instructing people. That was my task. That's what I signed up for. Question: was it? Is it? Is our task to do something, only to do something, and then, oh, I'm just going to do this because this is my business, and then that's it. I'll live however I want, but then when I come up and I say whatever I please, the way I please, or the way I understand, and I say it, and then when I go home, when I go back to work, I behave in a completely different way. Is it okay? That's what he is asking. That's what we are asking on what he is saying. And he realizes that this is not the correct thing, right? So, because he was very upset, people, his friends, helped him to get a treatment. He was not satisfied. So he went to talk to Minister Veneranda. She was a spirit who helped him get the task that he wanted, or got where he needed to be, and he wanted to talk to her. But she, naturally knowing the situation, because she probably never got disconnected from him, if we think about it a little bit, we will maybe even see that she was a spirit who was trying to help him as much as she could from all the things that she needed to do, and that she does. She already knew his story, right? And everything that he was asking, it was not possible, because it was senseless to take time from what she really needed to do to talk to him without leaving what she actually had to do, but out of courtesy. And here we see how these spirits work. My task is my task. I have a time to rest. I can use that time to rest to do something else. And then instead of resting, she went to talk to Monteiro. For 2 hours, she listened to him, complaining, weeping bitterly, and she was just there listening. In expressive silence, Monteiro tells us, she let me tire of my long and useless exhibition. He gets tired too. And then he shuts up, expecting her to say something to tell him that he is correct, that he didn't do anything wrong, that what's happening to him is very unjust, that he has all the right in the world of doing this. However, she smiles and replies, and I'll quote, "Monteiro, my friend, the cause of your defeat is neither complex nor difficult to explain. You surrendered yourself excessively to practical spiritism with humans, our brothers and sisters, but you were never interested in practicing true spiritism with Jesus, our Master." End quote. What does she want to say that? What does she want to say by that? Practical spiritism with humans, but never practicing true spiritism with Jesus. They are our brothers and sisters, the humans. So, if I am practicing spiritism with humans, we are on the same level. So we will get stuck at the same level. Because we are all on the same boat, we all have problems, we all have our own mistakes, we all commit our crimes, we all get things right from time to time, and we sometimes grow up a little bit, but we're not being forced by anybody who is better or who is greater spiritually than us to leap forward. However, once we decide to practice true spiritism with Jesus, and see, she's talking about true spiritism. Before she said practical spiritism with humans. What is practical spiritism? Mediumship. the lecture at the Spiritist Center, going out to the hospital to give consoling words to other people. This is practical Spiritism. But what is to practice true Spiritism with Jesus? Jesus is pulling us up at all times. That's why it is very hard. Because he doesn't want us to get stuck in materiality. Jesus wants us to leap forward in spirituality. He wants us to look at things in a very, very different way, and usually a very hard way, a very difficult way forward. Just like the parable of the Good Samaritan. Right? It would be very hard for the priest, for the Levite, to stop and help that man who had no clothes, and they were all purified or sanctified for preaching. And if they touched a man who were all covered in blood, they would need to go through a lot of things to go back to their purity so that they could go and pray and go to their synagogues. If we are talking about Spiritism, what would that be? Would I go out of my path to stop and waste, quote unquote here, some time to help a friend, to help a person that's in need? To what length would I go to help another person without judging, without making themselves be even lower than what they're feeling at that moment? What kind of compassion do I have when I talk to people who are suffering, who we think know less than what we know? Do we behave as if we know more? How humble I am once I go talk to people. Be a person of higher intellect or lower intellect than I am. Veneranda calls us to learn how to practice true Spiritism with Jesus, and not only to practical Spiritism with humans. We need both. We need practical Spiritism with humans, our brothers and sisters, because they are our brothers and sisters. And if we are Spiritists, that's what we need. We need to do that. But are we interested in practicing true Spiritism with Jesus, our Master? This is a very, very tough call for all of us. And Monteiro paused, thought for a few moments, and then said, "My attitude has changed a lot since then. Understand? How much has our attitude changed from the moment when we decided that we wanted to be Spiritist, that we wanted to follow the teachings of Jesus in our lives?" And Andre, stunned by this profound lesson, answered, chewing on his words like one who thinks more in order to say less. How much are we thinking before we are saying something? How much are we practicing true Spiritism before we practice Spiritism, practical Spiritism, with our brothers and sisters? That's what he is doing right now, chewing on his words. He is thinking about, what am I going to say? How am I doing with my own life after listening to so many teachings of Monteiro? Yes, yes, Andres says. I think I'm beginning to understand. Hopefully, I am also beginning to understand. But most importantly, hopefully, I have already started to practice true Spiritism with Jesus, our Master. I hope you all have a great week of learning, of living, and of serving. Have a great week, everyone.
Thank you for listening to Kardec Radio, broadcasting live every Saturday morning at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Email us and share your comments at www.kardecradio.com. Until next time, we wish you many blessings.